missing the Trail of Tears ride and all that stuff to come out here. Yeah, well, no, I don't drink coffee. Make you lose your hair. I've had 2 cups in my life that I can remember. One, I was riding a state trooper helicopter. I was 18 years old and doing the thing for the colonel. And I walked in and the pilot said, "Have some coffee." And at 18, when a helicopter pilot gives you coffee, you drink it. And then I used to, as an idiot youth minister, I had a fall retreat every year, the opening weekend of deer season. And so I'd take the kids to Fall Creek Falls, bring them home on Sunday night, drive to Montgomery on Monday, deer hunt, and come home. And so we went to Fall Creek Falls in a van that didn't have any heat, and I got, I don't know, flu or something. So I drove down there and hunted with my brother. I ate my supper on the hearth at Cracker Barrel. I drive back, and of course it's holiday, so we'll hunt one day with my brother, and we got to go to Arkansas with Jackie's mom and dad. We're driving to Arkansas, and I'm freezing to death. And I said, "Honey, stop at McDonald's. I need some coffee." She says, "You don't drink coffee." I said, "I'm just going to hold it." And so but I was cold. Oh, I was miserable. We're going to start, and if there are questions or there are clarifications or we want to make this interactive, I like to do that. I one of those guys, if I start talking shop, I can just talk. And so I walk you through at least what I'm doing in my practice, and then we'll kind of hope to give you some helpful information, a little bit of theory about addictions and their nature, and then some ideas about intervention and cyclical thinking and some other stuff. If you're visiting with us, this is one of our elders, Glenn Record, and his wife Susan, and they allow me access to do different projects here and there. I am one of the ministers at Meridianville. I am the intergenerational minister. What that means is I'm too old to work with the kids, and I'm too young to work with the golden 60 saints, or whatever that is they call them. And so I'm in the middle there. And one of the things that I do for the congregation is I'm a mental health resource. And so they allow me to do some marriage seminars and some different things. And so they've allowed us to take this Saturday. And we knew we'd have a small group because this is a specialized thing. And so I appreciate you coming. Normally would say, "Hey, this is who I am," and let you guys introduce. But, you know, when you do a marriage seminar, you know, "I'm Bob and this is Susan, we've been married." I don't want you to have to say, "I'm interested in this topic because," unless you want to disclose that. So as we go through the morning, if you want to make some comments or questions and give information about why you're interested, that's okay. But I'm not going to do those kind of forced introductions today. In my internship, getting my master's degree, you have to do a practicum. And my practicum, as a early 30s young man, was at Cedar Lodge, which is right outside Gunnersville. I think it's now called Mountain Lakes. So I did every Thursday for 18 weeks from noon to midnight at Cedar Lodge, and basically set in all the groups, set in with the 12-step folks, set in with the NA folks, set in on some of the classes. The kind of running theme was, if you ended up at Cedar Lodge on tater tot night, things are terribly wrong in your universe. And I didn't think the tater tots were that bad. But I spent a lot of time with that. A guy named Alex Ferris was the kind of the director of what they did there. And the biggest thing that I noticed in dealing with addictions was the cyclical nature of relapse. And it's almost like the idea of dealing with addictions is, can you prolong your periods of sobriety between addictions? And we've not had a very helpful mode or a helpful method for treating them. As a younger therapist in private practice, and I moved here in 1986 to be a youth and family minister. As a youth and family minister, I realized I was not qualified to deal with some of the things that were coming in an urban setting. I'd been a youth minister in small cities and was a minister in a small rural town in Arkansas. I got here, I had 12 different high schools represented in my youth group. That doesn't count the middle schools, and blended families and girls that cut and anorexia. And so I started working on my counseling tools, and the elders let me do that. And from studying the counseling, I ended up with the opportunity to get a license. A young man I was rock climbing with, a Nazarene. And I ran into him by accident, and we were climbing together, and we're out climbing one day, and he said, this degree you're getting is really cutting into our climbing. I said, well, I understand that. He goes, what are you going to do with it when you finish? I said, well, it's just going to help me be a better minister. I said, but ultimately, at some point, it'd be really cool to have a license as a therapist. He goes, my dad's a state supervisor, and if you'd like to get your license, he said he'd help you. And so handed to me in my lap my license as a counselor. He did not charge me for the 1,500 hours he had to do with me as a supervisor. I did not have to leave Memorial Parkway and work at a clinic. The supervision plan we had allowed me to see folks at the building. And so, I ended up being a counselor as a gift from God. And so I went into private practice in 98. And early in 98, I ran into my first sex addict. And sexual addiction is treated from a trauma-based model. And so I began to think, what if all addiction is treated that way? And so some of the things that we've thought about addictions may or may not be as accurate as we thought they were. In the original model of this is what addiction is, we talk about the chemical hooks that get taken in the brain when you use various things. And so the landmark study was, you put a rat in a cage and you give him 2 bottles. One bottle is water, one bottle is water and heroin. And he will drink the water with the heroin. Only drink the water with the heroin, and he will drink the water with the heroin till he dies. And so that's been our model. You've got these addictive substances, and when you use them, you get addicted because of something special about the addict brain and these chemical hooks that get in. Well, then somebody said, well, then why is it when your grandmother goes to the hospital for hip surgery, she doesn't come out as a heroin addict? Why is it when you go to the ER and you've broken your leg and you have a prescription hydrocodone, you don't end up eating those like Skittles the rest of your life? Why is it when the young men in Vietnam, who were 20% of the servicemen in Vietnam were using heroin all the time? And so there's going to be a heroin epidemic when these guys come back home. 95% of the guys who came home from Vietnam never touched heroin again. They weren't addicted to it. So some of our assumptions about what creates or causes addiction didn't seem to be that valid, didn't seem to be that accurate. So another therapist said, well, let's do the rat experiment again. But he built a thing called Rat Park. And if you're not a rat person, just bear with me. And he puts a bottle of water and a bottle of water full of heroin. But the rats had cheese, colored balls, tubes to crawl through, little wheels to run in, and a couple of other rats. And no rats died from heroin. No rats even used the heroin water compulsively. In fact, they rarely used it at all, and when they did, it was in moderation. And he said, addiction is not about chemical hooks in the brain, but it's about connection with other people. And so Lance Dodds, and if you want to do some reading, I'm not buying or selling anything, but Lance Dodds has written a book called The Sober Truth. He's also written a book called The Heart of Addiction, and he's written a book called Breaking Addiction. And again, I'm not buying or selling anything. Alcoholics Anonymous, 12-step programs, when they work, they work. But they work 8% of the time, nationwide. 8, as in, yeah. That means they're 92% not effective. Now, again, I know people who've been sober 45 years, and they've done their 12 steps, and they work their steps. The first sex addict I ever met is in a 12-step based program using a model that says, hey, we do work our steps. And when it works, it works. But it works for 8% of the people. And so there's some assumptions we're making about why people use, how people use, and you know, the idea that AA's, and I'm not trying to throw rocks at AA. You know, Cedar Lodge used AA. I've been involved with, you know, Christians Against Substance Abuse, Celebrate Recovery, all those kind of things, and trying to learn how to deal with this, because it's the thing I'm least effective at is dealing with addictions. In the last 5 years, I'm having a little more success with it. And so I want to talk about kind of that idea of the trauma-based model. And so when somebody's addicted, rather than asking what's wrong with you, the question you ask is what's happened to you. Okay? And so just looking at some things, let's talk about some assumptions, and let's talk about, you know, some of the thought cycles. Number one, most addicts, if you read Adult Children of Alcoholics, if you read Patrick Carnes' works on sexual addiction, and you sit down and you talk with somebody who's addicted, most addicts will say, I believe something is fundamentally wrong with me. There's this perception either from birth or as they're being raised that, hey, I'm broken in some way, shape, or form. I'm not normal. I'm not like you. And if you really, really knew me, you wouldn't like me. And that seems to be fairly ubiquitous among the folks that I've at least talked to and met with who are addicted. Well, if I don't think if you really knew me, you'd like me, that means when I go into a room, I have to wear a mask. I have to get your approval to be approved. I have to be liked by you to be likable. And so you walk into a room wearing a mask. I don't want to get in anybody's real personal bit. Anybody here a concealed carry guy? Okay? All right. What do you assume? Yeah, you know, what do you assume when you walk into a room as a concealed carry guy? Nobody knows you're carrying, but what else? Somebody else is carrying, because, you know, you go in and go, okay, who do I have to keep my eyes on, you know? I'm chasing a rabbit. I went into a Buffalo Wild Wings in Cookeville, Tennessee. I had to attend a meeting. And so I hate to go to meetings. I'd rather stick a fork in my eye. But anyway, I drive to Cookeville to go to this meeting, and as I walk in the door, there's this sign on the door that says, we do not recognize or honor the Second Amendment, and we ban all firearms on these premises. I already had to be at a meeting, so I was in a mood. And so I said, I need to see your manager. Little manager walks out. I said, I got a problem with your sign here. He goes, no, we as an establishment, we have the right. I said, nobody's arguing that. I said, but you used the word ban. I said, you can't ban firearms unless you have a firearm. I said, because I want to walk in here with mine. The only way to get me out of here is another guy with a firearm. I said, you know, that's just the way it works. I said, so maybe you should say, we request. I said, because the only reason I don't have my .45 with me is because I chose to obey your rule. I said, but if I walk in here and lay it on the table, the only way I leave is when more guys with guns comes and ask me to leave. And he was like, oh, I haven't really thought about that. And then the little girl goes, would you like a booth or a table? I said, well, I'd like a table. She said, why? Most people sit in booths. I said, well, if somebody starts cutting up in here, I'm going to have to beat him to pieces with a chair. And I said, it'd be much cleaner if I could just shoot him. And by the way, my drinks were full. My order was not late. It was super. I mean, it was the best experience I'd had at Buffalo Wild anyway. So you walk into a room as a concealed carry guy, you assume everybody else there is carrying. If I walk into a room wearing a mask, what do I think about everybody else in the room? Well, I'm not being real, because if you really knew me, you wouldn't like me. So you're not being real, and you're not being real. So they walk into this. They live in this atmosphere of superficiality. Now, how easy is it to be connected to other people if you're superficial? Nobody really knows me, and I don't really know anybody else. And I really can't trust anybody else. So the only person I can depend on to meet my needs is me. And my greatest need is fulfilled with my pill, or my weed, or my Coke, or gambling, or shopping, or eating, or porn, or whatever. And so now I'm only depending on myself. Again, I don't live in Rat Park. I don't like other rats. I don't trust other rats. I don't enjoy the cheese, and I don't play on the wheel. I'm over here by myself, and the only thing I do to sustain myself is drink out of the bottle that's laced with poison. And that's kind of the addicted cycle. So, and that's an older cycle. Patrick Carnes wrote about it in the late 70s, early 80s when he talked about Out of the Shadows, which is a sexual addiction book. When I start talking to people who are addicted chemically, same thing. People don't like me. I'm broken. I never have felt normal or like anybody else. And so in order to meet my needs, I do and whatever it is your ritual is. It may be a drug of choice or it may be an activity of choice. And that's, again, the thing about the chemical hooks, is that you can take a guy and you can get him off coke or heroin, and he may start gambling. Or she may start shopping. Or you may start... So addictions replace themselves with other addictive behavior that has very little to do with brain chemical hooks. Now, there's some really interesting stuff that happens with the human brain, and I'm not denying that, there are some folks who get hooked with the endorphins, and some people, when they drink alcohol, it lights something up in their brain that says, hello, we're friends forever. But that is the exception to addiction, not the rule. And we've treated everybody with that rule, and we've told addicts for years what? You're powerless. You have no control over this, and your brain's different than my brain because you're an addict. Well, that just reinforces I'm different, I'm broken, and I'm unconnected. And then you ask a guy to stand up every day, 2 meetings a day for the rest of his life and go, hey, I'm Bob and I'm an alcoholic. Well, when Bob looks in the mirror, what does Bob see? And we're Alcoholics Anonymous, so nobody really knows. So now I'm wearing a mask again. And I remember, when AA works, it works. But it's not working as well as TV says it does, as well as literature says it does. It's almost like an urban myth. And I'm not bashing AA. I know lots of people with success on it, but it's 8% effective. So that's why I'm learning and exploring this other stuff. Yes, ma'am. They perceive that they're broken, and that's the whole thing. This is not about reality. This is about perception. And I don't get to choose what's traumatic for you. And sometimes it's a big T trauma. Sometimes it's a little T trauma. But so when somebody says, well, if you read Carol Dweck's stuff on a fixed mindset, here's a kid whose dad played Division I football, and he'd really rather be in the band. And he may be a gifted musician, but because Dad can't read music and doesn't really appreciate it because he's a barbarian, there's this disconnect between me and Dad. I'm not good enough for Dad. Dad hates me. Dad doesn't approve of me. You'd be surprised how many guys I know that are addicted to say, never heard my dad say, good job. Never heard my dad say, I'm proud of you. Never heard my dad. Got a really, really close friend, and his dad's a hunter. His dad travels to Canada, stay 10 and 12 days at a time hunting. His son's a musician. He never hunted. He told me last week that he made some money on the internet with a website. And he says, oh, first time my dad's ever said, hey, that was a good job. You made a lot of money. This young man's 36 years old. And his dad never said good job. So he feels broken just because he disconnected with his dad. And kids interpret things in a really weird way. So in Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, some students believe that they are smart, gifted, and talented. And so, that image of a child, hey, you're smart, you're gifted, you're talented. Well, if you ever get exposed to something where you're not as smart, gifted, or talented as you think you are, what happens to your self-esteem? You've been told, you're gifted, you're smart, you're gifted, and then you end up in Miss Jones's honors biology. Hey, you're not that smart. I mean, my wife is now teaching a class I wouldn't be allowed to take, okay? And she's running into these little guys that have skated through middle school, and she's doing college prep work. And instead of saying, these are the answers to the test, they have to read and extrapolate information. Tell me what you know about termites and how they affect the nitrogen cycle. Don't know. I didn't know termites sniff nitrogen. That was going to be, this little guy told her the other day, said, Miss Jones, I'm under a lot of pressure. I'm Asian. It's like, and so So you think about somebody who's supposed to be smart, gifted, and talented, and they run into something they're not. Or somebody who's supposed to be the next big thing in football or soccer, and he's not. Or somebody's got a fixed mindset that says, I'm not smart, gifted, or talented. And they live their lives as a fulfillment of that self-fulfilling prophecy. What happens to them? They medicate themselves. They do something. And so it could be a real trauma. Somebody's actually done something terrible to you. Or it could be a perceived trauma. I just interpret the world funny. And if you've been around me much, you've seen this. Or not. So for every event that takes place, you have a byproduct that is emotion. Okay? Now, where do your emotions come from? Where do your emotions come from? Who gave you the ability to emote? My wife said, that's not a word. Yes, it's a real word. You actually have the ability to emote. Who gave you the ability to emote? Okay, it came from God. So every emotion that you can have is all valid. It doesn't matter what emotion it is. God gave you the ability to have that emotion. But what do we hear as kids are growing up? You don't cry. Big boys don't cry. You don't really feel that way. We become emotion dismissing or emotion disapproving. And people who are susceptible to compulsive behaviors live in an addictive cycle of I want pleasure and I want to avoid pain because I don't like real emotion, so I'm only going to play with the good ones. I'm going to play with the easy ones. I'm only going to play with the convenient ones. Everybody understand that? Okay, so and when you think about emotions and if you use them properly, they lead you to balance and they lead you to harmony. That's what your emotions are supposed to do. Godly sorrow works repentance that leads to salvation, not to be regretted. If I feel guilty and it causes a behavioral change, guilt has done what it's supposed to do. But if I feel guilty and I disconnect from other people or I become self-destructive, what does that emotion do for me? See? Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down upon your wrath. Well, it's okay to be angry. You just got to drive the anger. The anger can't drive you. I like to tell people that emotions are information, not instruction. And if we use our emotions as instruction, then they tell us to do things rather than just simply telling us things. Does that make sense? So when somebody comes into the office and they say, hey, I've got this precipitating event and I'm having these strong emotions, and so to avoid these emotions, I medicate. To avoid these emotions, I withdraw. To avoid these emotions, I do whatever. If your emotions lead you to distress, destruction, somebody can't spell. Distress, destruction, or dysfunction, your emotions aren't doing what your emotions are designed to do. But in the addicted cycle, I'm going to only seek pleasure, I want instant gratification, and I'm always going to avoid pain. That's when your emotions, read Daniel Goleman's book on emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence basically says a person who is mature and what we would assume to be healthy psychologically has a good insight of their own emotions. I know when I'm mad, I know when I'm sad, I know that, anxious and excited. Your body feels the same way under both. There are people who are very excited. Well, I'm having a great time. I'm having a panic attack. It's the same set of body signals, but there are some people who are susceptible to that misinterpretation error. So if you can learn, hey, this is the emotion I'm having, and I can identify it. In one study, there were girls who had eating disorders, and they couldn't tell the difference between mad, sad, angry, and hungry. So everything was hungry. And so when they had these overwhelming emotions, they self-medicate with food. And so once you learn that what your emotions are doing, so I understand my own emotions, And then because I understand those emotions, I can do self-regulation. Now, self-regulation has several arms. Number one arm of self-regulation is delayed gratification. I have the ability to say, I'm going to wait for a long-term goal. And people who can't wait for long-term goals are susceptible to compulsive behaviors. And if you can't do delayed gratification, you also usually have a problem with impulse control. And impulse control means if I feel something, I get to do something. So I'm mad, I punch a wall. I'm angry, I walk out of the house. I get these overwhelming emotions and I decide just to turn them off. Now, with emotional intelligence, recognize my emotions, and then recognizing those emotions, I do delayed gratification, I do impulse control. Then I also have this component of emotional intelligence called motivation. That means I deal with things that are unpleasant and uncomfortable because they need to be dealt with. And so if I can't work at something because it's hard, I'm smart, gifted, or talented, and all of a sudden I can't do Mrs. Jones's biology work, well, I'll just drop out. I'll cheat, I'll shirk, or I'll blame. A lot of people don't get the expectation they wanted out of life, and instead of working harder to change the expectation, they just quit, they give up, they self-medicate, they hide from it. So that's one side of emotional intelligence. The other side of, once I get all this in balance, I can recognize emotions in you and respond to you appropriately. I'm broken, I'm wearing a mask, you're wearing a mask. What does that do to my emotional intelligence? Well, I think you're mad at me. You're unhappy, it must be my fault. Mom and dad are fighting and they've got a divorce, it's because of me. And all of a sudden you have this interpretation error that when things happen, you misinterpret and come out with these really, really strong, overpowering emotions. And how do you deal with emotions that are overpowering? You blunt them. You kill them. You turn them off. So in this cycle, you have to ask about your perception filter. And your perception affects what you see stronger than what you see affects what you perceive. Does that make sense? If you believe in Bigfoot, and by the way, nobody who doesn't believe him has ever seen him. Just saying, all right? So I'm in the woods and I see something out in the edges there. I go, hey, there's a guy in a gorilla suit. That's a guy in a ghillie suit. That's a bear. I got all kind of options because I don't believe in Bigfoot. So my perception affects what I see. But if I believe he's out there, then I see anything. And it's a heffalump or a woozle. Right? So if my perception is I'm broken, I can't trust you, and you can't trust me, then everything that happens on a one-to-one interaction scale gets an interpretation error. People who are bullies see things as threatening that aren't threatening. And how do you respond to threat? With aggression. So I go to school and think, I got to show these people how tough I am so nobody hurts me. And so they start picking on people. Or they feel insecure, and to cover up that insecurity, they make people feel stupid, or they make people feel weak, or whatever. Kids who are bullied have a perception error, and they allow things that are benign to be interpreted as, oh man, that dude was really, really mean to me. And sometimes kids pick on you because they like you. You know, I know that below the age of 12, in order to flirt with a girl, you have to tease her. You pull her hair, you steal her stuff, you know. You sit between her and her friends. You make obnoxious body noises, you know. You do all kind of cool stuff. And then nowadays, he's harassing me. No, he likes you, sweetheart. You know, but he's not smart enough to say, I like you. So he has to do this dumb stuff. But if you've got a perception error and you misinterpret people's actions, then they're dangerous and they're picking on me and they don't like me and they don't hate me because our perceptions cause us to assign meanings to things. And if we assign valid meanings, we end up over here. If we assign invalid meanings, we end up over here. So when you start talking about why people use, a lot of times it's because they've got this interpretation error. They don't understand themselves. I'm broken. I can't be fixed. I'm not like you. I don't see the world the way you see the world, and you don't see me in a good, positive light. Now, at some point in the addicted cycle, these overwhelming feelings, and typically, we talk about no connection, being powerless, being helpless, being overwhelmed, or feeling trapped. When you have those feelings, and you've associated those feelings with some kind of use, now sometimes it's, I've got these feelings and I don't want those feelings to happen anymore, so I'm going to do this. Sometimes it's a one-to-one. It's A plus B equals C. Sometimes a kid's already smoking pot, and then he has this horrible experience with his dad or his mom or somebody at work or somebody at school, and those overwhelming emotions and pot use get linked together. Are you familiar with Pavlov? Okay. Guy rings a bell, makes a dog salivate. Dogs don't salivate supposedly unless there's food present, and he's getting dogs to salivate with no food because he's ringing the bell. The dogs have connected ringing a bell with food, and the two things are, well, we associate things all the time. And so sometimes people get this Pavlovian connection with, I've been yelled at, I've been powerless, I've been helpless, I've been overwhelmed, I've been trapped, and when I feel that way, I fix it with using whatever your use is. And it can be gambling, it can be smoking, it can be drinking, it can be popping pills. Lance Dodds calls this your key moment. It's something that's happened, and in this interpretation cycle, you may have missed something, and you've been living your life with a misconnected compass reading. Now, in order to survive, your brain is this monster overgeneralization tool. Your brain takes things that are similar and reacts to them as if they're the same. If you're scared of a hornet, you'll dodge a housefly. If you're scared of snakes and you're scooting through the leaves and there's a garden hose, you'll jump because your brain goes, close enough, and it protects you, okay? Anything that is traumatic to you, and I don't get to tell you what's traumatic. I don't get to choose that for you. Things that are traumatic to you, your brain says, nah, I don't like that. And we make these huge overgeneralizations. My mom eats Captain D's and has eaten Captain D's a long, long time. 7 years ago, she got a hold of some bad shrimp at Captain D's, got food poisoning, had to go to the emergency room. Guess what Mom doesn't do anymore? She's in Captain D's. It's not, we go to Captain D's and not order the shrimp. We don't go to Captain D's. None. Mom, how many shrimp have you eaten at Captain D's that didn't make you sick? But now, this traumatic event with shrimp at Captain D's is all future Captain D's, and it's reinterpreted what she's done in the past with Captain D's. And the poor captain's losing business because my mom used to be pretty prolific at Captain D's. But you take this, I've connected a similar thing, and what seems similar is the same. In my work that I'm doing, I'm taking this idea from Lance Dodds, weaving in a little cognitive behavioral therapy, and then using Courtney Armstrong's trauma-informed hypnotherapy. And we're trying to find the similar same moment. And the question that I'm asking people is the decision to use as powerful in your life as actually using? And right now, almost everybody I ask that question to says, yeah. Now think about that. Powerless, helpless, overwhelmed, trapped, or no connections. And I can just decide I'm going to do this. And it gives them as much relief or as much power as actually doing this. Think about that. So you're sitting at your office, and your boss comes in, and he drops a thick piece of paper on your desk, and it's 4:45 on Friday. He goes, you'll do this before you go home. And he walks out the door. Well, what you'd like to do is get that piece of paper and walk down the hall. No, I'm probably not. I've got a tea time or whatever it is. But when that boss walks in there and slams that paper down, the person who's in a similar same moment is, wow, my stepdad used to come in on Saturday and wake me up the only day I could sleep, and you can cut that grass today. Or you're going to go do, and just, I don't have any power. So yeah, I'll do your paperwork, but on my way home, I'm getting a beer. And then nobody quits their job, nobody stomps out. But deciding that I can drink on the way home is powerful enough that you sit there for 3 extra hours on a Friday and you do your paperwork. And then what do you do on your way home? You use. But he's not responding to his boss. He's responding to the abusive stepdad. And everybody I'm talking to right now is able to find me a similar same moment. And let's not talk about when you're at the store drinking. Let's not talk about when you're at the house, putting the rubber band on your arm about to shoot. Let's talk about before that, the precipitating event where you made the decision, I'm going to whatever. And I get them to, hey, take a deep breath, close your eyes, breathe in, breathe out. The decision to use, where do you feel that? You'd be surprised. I feel it in my head. I feel it in my throat. I feel it in my chest. I feel it in my stomach. When's the first time you ever remember feeling that way? And you'll be surprised at the stories people will tell you that they would say are unconnected to their use. But guess what's happening? We're finding out those things are connected. And I've got this trauma. Remember, this is not, hey, what's wrong with you? It's, hey, what's happened to you? Because it's so powerfully linked to something that they consider to be traumatic. Trapped, overwhelmed, helpless, powerless, or lack of connection with other people. It is so powerfully linked on a Pavlovian level, a DNA level, an unconscious level, or a non-conscious level. They don't even know the cycle's there. And you start identifying that cycle, and they go, wow, I've been using because of these sets of feelings. And you can unplug that trauma or undo those feelings. You've cured the addiction. Now, in the old days, and I'm in that camp. I'm still sort of in that camp. I got a foot in this camp. When my behavior costs me more than it costs you, I'll change my behavior. I believe that about raising children. I believe that about training dogs. I believe that about dealing with tough people in the workplace, or with manipulative people or overbearing people. And at some point, there's a part of that's true when dealing with addictions. But if bad consequences could cure addictions, nobody would be addicted, would they? Your first DUI would cure you. Your first night in the county jail would cure you. The first time you lost a fight because you thought you were John Wayne when you were drunk would cure you. But how many people get these bad consequences with addictions and repeat? Well, what's more powerful than bad consequences? Man, I've got this power here that says my stepdad can't beat me up anymore. These girls think I'm nice. I'm not a loser. I'm not stupid. I'm not helpless. And so, yeah, if I've got something that replaces that on a non-conscious level, that's way more powerful than the fact I got arrested by a cop the 9th time they took my driver's license. That's way more powerful than my parents kicked me out of the house and I'm living under a bridge. That's way more powerful than you're going to lose your marriage, you're going to lose your job, you're going to lose your career. Because if bad consequences would erase use, nobody would use ever, would they? Do you know anybody who uses doesn't get bad consequences? And how many times has our punitive consequences made somebody quit using? Does that make sense? So now what we're trying to do is understand how this cycle takes place, how it's linked to these kind of things, and how we can unlink them. Questions, comments, clarifications? Yes, ma'am. Okay. Wow. Yeah. Well, how many of you can tell the difference between angry and scared? Because most of us, when we're really, really scared, act really, really angry. You have that. If you scare me, I get mad. I used to think it's because I didn't like to be scared. If you scare me, I will knock you out. There's a trail of bodies at Harding University. Hey, this is funny. Let's scare Lonnie. No, we don't scare Lonnie. Jerry Germany hid in my closet one night. R.A. let him in my room. I walk in the room. I open the door. I reach in my closet, and my clothes move. And that's the last thing I remember. They were pulling me off Jerry Germany. I mean, Jerry said I picked him up, and I mean, no, really. But I was on top of him. Rain in the thunder, son. They had to come in here and get me, and I remember none of it. But when I'm scared, I get mad, apparently. and part of that is, and this is, I can't believe this is going to be live streamed. If you throw a glass of water in my face, we'll fight. You slap me, you spit on me, you call me all kind of names. But if you walk up and throw water on me, I have to really hold that together. I don't like that startle reflex. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know what I've got it linked to. But you can do all kind of stuff to me, and I can maintain my composure. But if you catch me off guard and splash me with water, you might get hurt. Now, I'm learning slowly not to hurt you, but I confuse anger and scared. And so I don't know why these girls do this. And it's not 100% for eating disorders, but some of the girls eating disorders, that's what they do. And so it goes back to emotional intelligence. I don't recognize the feelings in my body and don't know how to process them. I don't know what to do with them. Men get overwhelmed with emotions all the time. We just don't deal with them. You know, well, what are you feeling? I don't know. Well, I don't want to take the time to know. Okay, right, guys? I mean, we don't say, well, I feel like a cheesesteak. Yeah. And so people who don't work well with emotion and they've not been emotion coached, parents have been emotion dismissing or emotion disapproving, then you're not allowed to feel anything. Now, I don't want this to be an indictment, but how many times does church create the idea of you can't be real with your emotions? We come in and we want people to judge our outsides, not our insides, so it's better to look good than to be good, so we don't talk about trouble. We don't talk about problems. We don't talk about issues. We don't admit that we're imperfect people. 20 years in private practice, started in youth ministry in 1980. Every sexually perverted person I know. Now, I've got a practice that touches mostly church people, so that may be a skewed sample. Every person with a severe sexual perversion comes from the extreme right end of our fellowship, where they are hyper overreactive to human skin. They are way, way, way to the other side about modesty. They're way, way closed-mouthed and reactionary about sexuality. Why? You're not allowed to talk about this stuff. In our family, we would fight like cats and dogs, but Dad was a preacher, so on the way to church we had to act this way. And the young men I deal with who are sex addicts and the young ladies I deal with who are sex addicts come out of that far right-wing stuff. And it's not just our fellowship. Look at the folks in Islam. Look at some of the stuff that's come out of the Amish communities, some of the really, really strict. You find those folks off the chain in some of their behaviors. I'm not saying it's causative, but there's a correlation because we're not allowed to be real with our emotions. And so if I don't know what to label them, then I just deal with them. Does that answer your question? When a little girl cuts, the self-mutilation, not suicidal gestures, but the cutting. You know what the phenomenon is there? So something going on in my life. Powerless, helpless, hopeless, overwhelmed, trapped. Some people think it deals with being over-controlled. Some people think it's being overwhelmed. I've seen a little bit of both. But if you take a pen or a razor blade or a knife and you scratch your skin, you're having to be so careful to get that deep enough to scar but not deep enough to bleed out, that while you're doing that, you can think about nothing else. You ever heard the phrase mindfulness? When you're cutting your wrist or cutting your arm or cutting your thighs, something happening with you at such a deep level, everything else goes away. I've coined the term pathological mindfulness. They're getting to a mindfulness state, a state where the world is at bliss, but they're getting there by a really dangerous route. It's pathological mindfulness. Well, once I get that connected, hey, I can do this and feel great after I've had a blow up with mom or dad, or after I feel like I'm ugly or fat or whatever. I do this and it all goes away. Well, you get that linked. And once you get the Pavlovian, and I'm probably making up a word there, once you get that connection with this behavior, this activity, this substance works that way, you see how powerful that is? And why bad consequences won't fix it. We're going to put you in jail for 90 days. Fine. Now in jail, what have you been told? You're a loser. You're an addict. You're a lawbreaker. So when you get out after 90 days in jail, what do? Whew, that was terrible. I think I'll feel better. Right? And then when you tell somebody you got to quit doing that, well, you've got to give me something that helps me deal with my feelings that works as well as that does, or you're not going to replace that. And that's why this mechanism of addiction is so strong and so powerful that bad consequences won't fix it. Now, I'm not saying that you allow somebody who's abusing a dangerous substance to live in your basement and you pay all their bills. I'm not saying, my new catchphrase is you tell adults, you are free to choose, but not all choices are free. But you can't say you can't live here with the idea of being punitive. You can't say you can't live here and you're suddenly going to have a prodigal son moment and go, well, I just won't drink anymore. You've got to set limits that are loving limits to protect them from themselves and protect you from them without the idea that I'm going to do this to you and it's going to change your addiction. Do you see how those two things sometimes get confused? In dealing with a manipulative person or dealing with an addicted person or dealing with anybody, your choices for them can't be, I do this so you'll do that. It has to be, I do this because of my values and because I'm protecting you from yourself. But it's never, if I do this, you'll do that. And we've messed that up. If you're hard enough on them and you make them hit rock bottom, then they'll wake up. No. But now, do you let them hit rock bottom? Yeah. But the motive behind it's got to be different. Now, does it sound like I'm doing this? Or does everybody understand the distinction between the two? Because, look, I love you. I support you. I want you to be successful, but I can't let you drive my car because you kill yourself or kill somebody. That's different than, well, you're a loser addict and you can't have a car anymore. It's got to be why we do what we do, not just what we do. Everybody keeping up okay? Is this too radical, or does it make some sense? Okay, so when you get the similar same moment, you get a trigger, and whatever that trigger is creates preoccupational thinking. So something happens. I like to say it's what Lance Dodds calls the key moment. I'm calling it the similar same moment. Something happens and I'm reminded of these overwhelming feelings. I'm reminded of this trauma. I'm reminded of this disappointment. Whatever it is, once I get that trigger, I start thinking about, hey, where am I going to get my thing? What am I going to do? One of the guys that I work with says that's when you enter the grind. Because every day is, who can I call? Who can I contact? Where can I find my stuff? And can I arrange my schedule to go get it and not get caught? He said, then you're a rat on a treadmill. He says, it's the grind. But you get whatever the trigger is, you start preoccupational thinking. And once you enter the preoccupational thinking phase, it's just a step away from the ritualized behavior. And ritualized behavior is ingrained patterns of interacting. This is how I reacted to this. This is similar. I react to that way. And once you get on the ritualized behavior, you're on autopilot. Anybody want to share how strong habit strength is? You do anything out of habit? I shampoo my head every now and then. I get up in the morning, get ready to go to work. I'm trying to go through my routine. The phone rings, and I do this, and then Jackie needs this, and I jump in the shower, and I hadn't had hair in 20 years. But for 30 years, I had hair, and I shampooed it. You ever shave twice in a day? You know, get up in the morning. Well, I guess not, but you know, I'm glad to know that. You know, you get up in the morning and you shave, you get ready for work, but then you end up having to change somebody's tire or do something. So you run back in the house and you take a quick shower. And you already shaved this morning, pinhead. But it's autopilot behavior. You ever been driving somewhere and end up at work? Yeah, oh yeah. See, you know, we get on that ingrained behavior. So once you have the trigger, and that trigger is connected on this linked subconscious, non-conscious, almost a molecular DNA level, I start thinking about my stuff, whatever it is, whether it's using pornography or gambling or cooking or stealing or shooting up or taking a pill or drinking. Doesn't really matter what the compulsive behavior is. Once you start that preoccupational thinking, you get on autopilot. And that's habit strength. And habits are strong. Man, that ritualized behavior. With the police, we call it training scars. You will do what you are trained to do when you're trained to do it. I've said for years, if I ever got attacked by anybody and I felt like they were knew what they were doing as a Brazilian jiu-jitsu player, I would tap and see if they just out of habit let me go, and then I'd pound them. I did that in college once. This guy he bragging about having his black belt in some striking style, but it was a really stylized, I think it was Taekwondo or something. Those are tournament fighters. And so, you know, you go in and the guy says go, and you bounce around, and if you kick a guy in the body, the referee yells point, and then you go back to your corners. So this guy's talking smack and trash, and he throws a flurry of kicks at me. I turtle up. He hits about twice. I yell, point! He celebrates. I tackle him. Habit strength. You do what you're trained to do the way you're trained to do it, and it will overwhelm you. There's this pretty cool video of a weapon takeaway. And so what you do, you either walk around the blind corner or it presents you with a fake weapon, and you grab the back strap of the weapon and you grab the barrel and you bend it over, and you're not strong. I mean, that lever just happens every time, and you take it away. So to learn muscle memory, myelinization of your nerves, you practice that. So you may do 100 repeats. Well, in order to be efficient, some police academies do a take away and hand the gun back, take away, hand the gun back, take away, hand the gun back. So I don't know if it was a fake film or not, but they showed this guy as a state trooper video camera, and this dude jumps out of the car, and as he walks up to it, the guy pulls the gun out, the state trooper goes, and hands it back. And the guy's trying to get away from it, and the state trooper's like, oh no, you know. And I don't know if it was staged for this conference I was at, but he was like, okay, you will do what you practice doing. So, you know, here's this guy takes his gun away and hands it back, and the guy's like, I don't want it, you know. And then they're playing hot potato with his weapon. Well, think about what would happen if you lived the lifestyle of dealing with trauma. You know, I think it was Courtney Armstrong who says, if you're walking through the woods and a bear jumps out, your body has a response to the bear, right? And it's a proper response. But what if the bear came home every night? What if the bear lived in your living room? What kind of reaction patterns would you have as an adult? And suppose the only way to deal with the bear was to be sexual, or to drink alcohol, or to take a pill, or to cut myself. You see how that pattern of behavior would get so ingrained that you wouldn't even recognize you had the pattern of behavior? And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about dealing with this from not what's wrong with you, but rather what has happened to you. And that understanding helps us break the cycle of addiction. And it's not from the standpoint that we can go back and fix the trauma. But you can go back and say, this behavior, and please understand what I'm saying, this behavior may have worked at one point for you, but it's not necessary behavior now. You don't live with the bear anymore. That your boss is not your stepdad. That's not the bully at school. That's not, but we have trouble differentiating between the then and the now, because that which is similar gets reacted to as the same. Does that make sense? All right, any questions? I understand the mind can only absorb what the seat can endure. So let's take a real quick little, maybe grab some water, a bathroom break. Bathrooms are straight out this door, and then there's water fountains scattered through the building. And maybe 5-10 minutes, come back, and we'll go into kind of a second phase of this. Is this practical, helpful? It making sense? All right, good deal. Back. Now this is, I'd like to read this quote to you, which is maybe different than what you've heard. Addiction is a part of a person's overall psychology. Addiction is a part of a person's overall psychology. It is a symptom, notice that. It's not a problem, it's not a disease. It is a symptom produced by the same issues that trouble a person in general. So people who are addicted are reacting to something that troubles them in general, and the same things that trouble them are the same things that trouble us. We've responded to that in a different way sometimes. Understanding addiction helps understand all the other areas that trouble a person. When we identify the areas of trouble in a person's life, then we understand the addiction. So you start saying, okay, let's look at your coping mechanisms. Let's look at your defensive mechanisms. Let's look at your interpretation errors. Let's look at how you respond to stress. Let's look at how you respond to anger. Let's look at how you respond. And if you will notice that in general, people who are having difficulty are having difficulty responding in all those areas of life. And we've hyper-focused on the fact that you respond to this with a chemical. And we've made them a different species of people, and they're not. Addiction is a part of a person's overall psychology. It's a symptom produced by the same issues that trouble a person in general. Understanding addiction helps understand all the other areas of trouble. And when we identify the areas of trouble in a person's life, we help understand the addiction. That's from Dr. Dodds. So what, the general human response is I want to seek pleasure and I want to avoid pain. Right? Now think about, in general, what do you do? Let's go to the gym. Well, I do the exercises I like to do. I don't do the exercises I don't like to do. Why? I'm looking for pleasure. I'm avoiding pain. Right? I can go home. I can pull something out of the freezer and I can cook, or I can swing through the drive-thru. Instant gratification. Easy fix to that. Or I can do this hard work. I can go outside and play, or I can do my homework. What are we going to do? We can drive to Tuscaloosa for 4 hours and watch the ball game, or I can sit in a recliner in the air conditioning with no traffic. I can pause the game and go get something to eat. If I miss it, I can rewind it. Why would I do that to myself? Okay? Why would I be in a room with that many Alabama fans? Did I say that out loud? Okay. I could say that about anybody's fans. Okay? I'm not just... So, when we have big T trauma, little t trauma, or anything that is pain, what do? We avoid pain and we seek pleasure. What does this do for us? Instantaneous roller coaster ride pleasure. And so anything that becomes a trigger, our brains go trauma, big T trauma, little t trauma, anything we call pain, that similar same moment, helplessness, hopelessness, powerlessness, feeling inadequate, feeling broken. When I have those feelings, I've got an instant get out of jail free card. And I really don't care what it costs me later. Because I'm not dealing real well with delayed gratification and impulse control. I'm not thinking long term. I'm thinking about what I want now rather than what I want most. And that's what happens with emotion-based thinking. Because when you do emotion-based thinking, what you want now becomes greater than what you want most. If you talk about, long-term goals or what they call deep pleasure, that's the difference in a candy bar or a 4-hour homemade chocolate mousse. It's the difference in, hey, let's go to the movies this afternoon, or let's earn a four-year degree. That's a good first kiss, or kissing somebody goodnight after you've been married 33 years. Observations Matt Evans made in a series of lessons called I Am Not a Quitter. But we tend to quit when it's painful, when it's hard, when it's traumatic, okay? And so those kind of thoughts, you have the emotional trigger. The trigger produces the craving produces the ritual involves using, which creates emotional pain, which creates a craving, which creates a ritual, which involves using, and there's your cycle. And it just spins out of control all the time. Now, the interesting thing about things that are complicated or cyclical, you take your grandfather clock that's sitting in the hallway, 200 years old. What if you open that thing up and pull one of those springs out? Okay, besides that, let's see if you can get away with it. What happens to the clock? If you break the pattern, the entire mechanism ceases to work. If we can help people break their response pattern, their defensive mechanisms, their normal way of coping with issues in life, teach emotional intelligence or clear the trauma, identify, listen, when you're acting this way because you've associated this circumstance with this circumstance, and you've made this connection that is so powerful connected to your trauma or pain that your default setting is to use. If this is a cluster of behavior, and I know grapes don't grow on a little single plant like that. Get your literal brain, okay? If this is the cluster of behavior, this is the fruit. And a lot of times, if you're dealing with behavioral interventions, you can focus on the fruit. I'm kind of a mouth breather and a knuckle dragger. When my behavior costs me more than it costs you, I'll change my behavior. That works with kids. That works with manipulative people. That works with people who have explosive tempers. I really believe, I can't make you do anything. I can make you choose to do other things. Right? You can drive as fast as you want to. But you run into one of those boys in a gunmetal gray car with a blue light. You can go into anybody's house you want to. Anytime you want to. If you're willing to deal with that scared housewife in a 357. Okay? So I really believe that a lot of times you can just treat the fruit. It's how I help people deal with rowdy kids. It's how I help people deal with out-of-control adolescents. It is how I used to say we had to deal with people who had addictions. But this behavioral cluster can't be outweighed with consequences because it's connected to this. You may put me in jail. You may take my car. You may destroy my marriage. You may make me stand in front of the judge. You may make me do 900 hours of community service. But those things don't outweigh this. Because when I get to do that, this goes away. So without sounding like I'm being hypocritical or duplicitous, I really believe in this model. Treat the fruit. But sometimes you got to go back and treat the stem. What does this fruit grow on? That's our medical model. And we've used the medical model treating, addiction as a disease, and we wanted to talk about all the brain chemistry and all the brain changes and all the endorphins and all that kind of stuff. And we've approached it as a medical problem, not a medical problem. It's a psychological problem. If it's a medical problem, you could cure it with what? Medicine. So I'm going to cure your drug habit with drugs. There's some point when you're doing corporal punishment on a child that's probably a mixed message. You hit your little brother, I'm going to spank you. So you get to beat on people when you're bigger and stronger. Is that the rule? There's got to be a thing where sometimes we're sending a confusing message. I don't think there's anything wrong with spanking. My dad walks in here and spanks me today. I'm still in the black. All right? I'm just saying, I should have got more. But But at some point you go, okay, you hit your little sister, and if I hit you for hitting your little sister, what have I told you? The bigger people get to do the hitting. Right? So you hit your little sister, she gets to go in your room and get anything she wants. Because this is about power. Now, I've associated hitting with power, and now it gets associated with being powerlessness. So I'm not going to hit my little sister because I don't want to go play with my Tonka toys. You know, you tease your little sister, she gets to pick your outfit out for school tomorrow. That shuts that stuff down real quick. By the way, you made a C. Well, I think you are dressing so cool that you don't think you have to study, so we're going to dress like an academic genius tomorrow. So here's a white shirt with button downs, a pocket protector, some dark rimmed glasses, no contacts today. Now, when you get your grades up, you can dress any way you want to, but until you get your grades up, we're going to wear this outfit. Amazing what happens to grades. It's just awesome. Of course, we told Lonnie Beth, said your grades and your curfew are the same. A's, you stay out till 11, B, 10, C's, 9. If you make less than a C, you don't get to go anywhere, okay? Of course, the secretary from school called and said, your daughter just signed up for conditioning, PE, and welding. You know how hard it is to find pink Carhartts? But anyway, she took a semester of welding and got a curfew till 11 o'clock. But as a parent, when you make a contract with a kid, you got to know better. So, you know, I've treated behavior clusters and said, okay, here's the fruit, and I want the fruit to eliminate. It's about behavior. I don't think that works with addictions. I'm not saying there's no consequences for addictions. I'm not saying there can't be some things where you go, you know, you can't live here, you can't have access to my bank account, but it's got to be for a different reason. This will not change behavior. This is protecting the addict and protecting the people who are influenced by the addict from being harmed by the addictive behavior. Does that make sense? Does that sound like I'm doing two things at once? It's different than I'm going to make you so miserable you'll quit. That doesn't work. If being miserable made people quit, nobody would use. Because nobody who uses is not miserable. Then you got this medical model, the stem that this fruit hangs on, and we tend to talk about, you know, the brain chemistry stuff. Really, what you're looking at is the root. This fruit showed up because of these roots. If you ain't got roots, you will never have fruit, right? So what's the underlying, what's the cause, what's the why behind the behavior? And that's understanding the mental cycle. That's understanding the interpretation errors. That's understanding the I'm helpless, I'm powerless, I'm hopeless, and the things that we've connected one thing with the other. So this is Lance Dodds' model. He has 7 steps. Okay? 12 steps are only as good as the person leading them. That's why AA is probably only effective 8% of the time. Now, again, I'm not a hater on AA. If it works for you, it works for you. But how many people do you know who've been through AA 9 times? How many people do you know who've been to Bradford 4 times? I was talking to a guy this week, he's been to 11 treatment centers, trying to get into another one. Well, if you do the same thing the same way and expect different results, that's a sign of insanity. And so something's wrong in our approach. So, first thing you do, step number 1, this is Lance Dodds' 7 steps. You diagnose or you identify the problem. It's a self-understanding is best. You say, I've got, this is my behavior, and my behavior is in response to some underlying issues. Then you educate. Let's talk about the nature of your response. Why do you connect this, and this? And then you clarify the nature of the key moment or the trigger to the path of addiction. There's an emotional trigger. That emotional trigger is either present or past, and the thing that is similar gets treated as the same. And so, hey, this has underlying roots in feeling, and I really believe you can just generalize and say anything that makes you feel powerless, helpless, hopeless, or trapped is going to be your connection. And so once you identify the key moment, I call it the similar same moment, and then you identify the sequence. What is my defensive mechanism? Why in all my interactions do I end up acting this way? Because, see, when you do a defensive pattern, it blinds you to the key moment. So I've got this defensive mechanism where I do minimization, or I do denial, or I do blame, or I do passive-aggressive behavior. So rather than dealing with this overwhelming feeling, I found a way to kind of dance around that to get me back into my addiction, or to get me toward my addictive path. And so you identify the sequence that says, okay, this is my defensive style. You'll notice that when you have conflicts, you act this way here, you act this way here, you act this way here. Wow. How many jobs have you had this year? 7. What happens? Well, the boss picks on me. You're the only person the boss ever picks on? Yeah. So this guy's not being sued. Alexander Chenard's not calling him. You know, there's some problem. Well, and realizing that, hey, if you can't get along at this school, and you can't get along at this factory, and you can't get along at this church, there's a common denominator here. Oh, wow, I've got this defensive style that when I get these triggers, my first thing to do is I mask my response to it by making it somebody else's fault. In general, think about minimization, denial, or blame. You minimize behavior, you deny the behavior, or you blame somebody else for the behavior. That's one of the defensive styles. There's lots of defensive mechanisms that people use. But once you identify the things that blind you to actually seeing your key moment, then number 5 is you identify the key moment linked to the feelings of helplessness in the key moment. Hey, when you feel this way here, can you connect it to any feeling you've had there? You'll be surprised what people connect to those things. I mean, it's amazing how your brain logs information and holds on to it for a long, long period of time. And you think about the things that are traumatic for you and how you've got them associated. Any event that gets linked to an emotion becomes a memory. Those of you who are teaching classes or preaching, and I'm not talking about, jumping pews and handling rattlesnakes, but if you can get your audience to participate with you on an emotional level, any event linked with an emotion becomes a memory. We have 4 or 5 guys, and we get a chance to go to several events a year and do some skits. And the skits we do are usually values-based, kind of an experiential education. But what we do with the skits is we draw people into a scenario, and they get linked with an emotion. They laugh, they cry, they whatever. An event linked with an emotion becomes a memory, and people remember those skits for years. Super effective teaching tool without actually teaching. But events linked with an emotion becomes a memory. So the things that are significant to you are things that have happened to you, and you've labeled them as good or bad, happy or sad, enjoyable, not enjoyable. So you think back to the things in your experience base that are powerful to you. I see a lot of people's heads nodding. You think, wow, that's huge. You know how many times that I have been rock climbing or rappelling since I was 14 years old? A lot. I think I probably had 2,500 people on rope for the first time. I think I could probably come up with at least, I think I come up with at least that many people that I know I've taken out and put on rope. Do you know the one I remember? When the dude turned upside down at 150 feet, started losing his pants and his harness. Because I thought I watched a man die. And I went out on a rope and put a harness on him in midair, and then had to climb back out, not knowing if I could climb out or not. And the rope I was on to do the rescue wouldn't get me to the ground. It was a one-way trip. And I remember being on the edge of that cliff going, there's nobody here can explain to my wife why I made the choice to go over this edge. And of all the climbing I've done, that shows up. Because it's an event linked with some powerful emotions. And it stays with me. In fact, for a long time, it was a traumatic memory. I've actually talked to the lady that trained me in the trauma-informed hypnotherapy and said, look, I need to spend some time with you because I'll be driving along and I can go by those rock walls in Nashville, boom, and I see this dude hanging upside down. And pull over sick to your stomach. Now, we got the guy off the rock. He's rescued. We're very good friends. Had a happy ending. But your brain doesn't play the whole story. Your brain freezes at the bad part of the memory. So when you never go, hey, I broke my arm, and then I got this cool cast, and the cheerleaders all signed it, and now I'm fine now. It's, I broke my arm. Because you stay in the bad part of the memory. So when you get this key moment, it shows up and then gets linked to all kind of stuff. And just from my own experience, I'd be in the garage playing with ropes and see the dude upside down. And I don't just see him hanging there, and I don't see him rescued. I see him the first time he flopped and thinking, that's a dead man. Now, easy. If you'll do what I ask you to do, it won't happen to you, okay? I put you in a chest harness and you can't invert. But, but again, of all the experiences that I've had in the vertical world, that one used to show up and haunt me. And I think I fixed it. But you think about the things that grab you. Of all the funerals I've done, I got to be pretty good friends with death. They cremated a little girl who had lived long enough to get a name. And when it came time to move everybody away, the little mom sat there and said, I said, you need to, and she said, I'm afraid they'll lose her because she was reduced to a little silver egg. And I was unprepared for the size. And I said, if you'll go, I'll put her in the ground. They won't lose her. And so when they moved the green carpeting, it wasn't a hole, it was a post hole. And I got it on my knees and on my belly in a suit jacket and laid that little egg down there. Of all the funerals I've done, I remember that one. So think about the things that you remember and how powerful they are. And what if you'd link them with something that made it go away instantly? You think you could break that connection in a 28-day program? You think you could break that connection in how many meetings could you go to? So you identify the key moment and you recognize the defensive mechanisms that keep you from recognizing the key moment. And then you identify the circumstances where this is triggered. Hey, I recognize that when I'm overwhelmed, when I'm insecure, when I haven't had enough rest, when I'm with new people, whatever those circumstances are, you start, okay, here's the emotional trigger, and sometimes that emotional trigger can be circumstantial, not psychological. And then you look at the nature and cause of the helplessness trap, and you try to reverse those feelings with finding ways to be powerful. So your boss comes in and says, you're going to do this paperwork. Your replacement behavior is, yeah, you can make me do that paperwork, but on my way home, I'm going to drink. That's powerful. Well, what if you could do something different? What if you could say, I work on until 6 o'clock and I'm walking out? What if I could say, I'm going to go do my thing and I'll finish this Saturday when I don't have an appointment? There's all kind of ways that you can respond to powerlessness without having to go in the old pattern. But we get locked into immediate gratification, avoiding pain, seeking pleasure. And that's why that pattern is so easy to repeat. And if you can find, hey, this is a powerful action I can do that's not using. And aren't there a lot of powerful actions we can use that don't involve using? All kinds of things. You can set limits. You can say, hey, boss, I've already got a commitment here. Lots of things you can do. I guess the boss thing's a bad example because you get fired. But at the same time, if it's important enough to you not to do the thing, I've been self-employed so long, I'd live under the bridge and eat homeless people before I'd be employed by somebody again full time. But that's a value with me. And so you think about, what could I do that makes me feel powerful other than using? But we've never associated I use to feel powerful. It's I use because I've got an emotional trigger that creates a craving, that creates a ritual, that creates using it. And it's all based on I'm avoiding pain and seeking pleasure. And then the last thing that Dodge talks about is you use a second perspective to help them see themselves. Okay, look at yourself outside yourself, or let me tell you what I see. You're doing this in response to this. Oh, wow. I never saw those two connections. And sometimes just understanding the connection is enough to break it. Because if you realize, I do this in order to get this, and it never works, or it only works temporarily. I tried this as an experiment before starting to deal with folks who are dealing with addictions and talk to rebellious teenagers. Why do teenagers rebel? Freedom, right? How many times has rebellion got you real freedom? Oh, I lost the car. I got grounded for 6 weeks. I couldn't play football. They took my phone. So you're telling me that every time you do this to try to get freedom, it results in more freedom or less freedom? Less freedom. You're not very smart, are you? And then sometimes that oh, wow, I've linked this with this to get this, and this never happens. And sometimes that's enough to break the link. And that's not always that easy with addiction. So I took the 7 things that Lance Dodge talks about and reduced them to about 4 steps and combined them with Courtney Armstrong's trauma-informed hypnotherapy. And if I can identify the trauma, then we leave addiction off the table and we treat the trauma. And when you change the trauma, guess what happens to the addiction? It goes away. Just plain and simple. Now, I know it sounds like snake oil and voodoo, and an infomercial. But when the addiction follows this model of a trauma trigger, a key moment, a similar same moment, and you can identify that and process it, if you break the trauma, you break the cycle. And it'll be very interesting if you're dealing with addiction yourself, or if you're dealing with someone who has addiction, to start looking at it from not a cluster of behavioral fruit, not a medical model stem, but hey, what's my underlying root? And if you can destroy the roots, what happens to the rest of that plant? What happens to it? The fruit swivels up and dies. It doesn't germinate any more seeds, and then the stalk even goes away. You're putting Roundup on behavior, which is cool. Roundup is my friend, by the way. And so learning to start with, okay, let's not talk about what you use, and let's not talk about necessarily, don't use the word why you use. Let's talk about what happens inside you when you use. There's a feeling, and you're using in response to this feeling. Where's the feeling at? In my head, in my chest, in my neck, in my throat, whatever. When's the first time you ever remember having that feeling? And all of a sudden, you've got your connection to your key moment. I talked to a guy last week, and he said, well, I took a psychological profile. It says I was passive-aggressive. I said, do you know what passive-aggressive means? He goes, no, not really. So I had a pen on the desk and a pen in my hand. And I said, tell me to put my pen away. He said, put your pen away. I said, that pen? He said, no, I said, this pen? He goes, no, that pen. I said, this pen. He goes, yeah, that pen. You want me to put that pen away? Yes, I do. Okay, oops. He just laughed. He goes, yeah, that's what I do. He said, I'm passive-aggressive. I'm not defying you. I'm not telling you no, and I'm not telling you you can't make me. I'm just not doing what you've asked me to do. He said, well, as a little kid, my parents would come in and say, you can't go to Bobby's house today till you cut the grass. And you can't go outside and play till you've done this in the kitchen. And you can't do. He said, and the whole time I'm obeying mom and dad. And in the back of my mind, I'm saying, yeah, I got weed in my room, and when you go to bed tonight, I'm getting high. Passive-aggressive. And when he gets into a situation where somebody bosses him around, guess what he does? said, when you feel like somebody's bossing you around, what can you do to change that feeling? And then we began to talk about it. And of course, in the present circumstances he was at, he felt trapped. I said, anybody holding a gun to your head to make you be here? He goes, no. I said, then you're choosing to be here. I said, are you trapped or is it your choice? And I did a little spin doctrine with him, but he goes, you know what? It's my choice. I said, so are you powerless? Nope. Then so because they make you do this, is that something now you need to medicate because you feel like you need to be passive aggressive with? No. And you can see the light bulb go off. He was like, wow, I can make these different choices. So rather than treat from the old model of, I want you to just not do this. Why can't you just not drink? Why can't you just not smoke? Why can't it's really about changing the way a person thinks. In self-defense, and I goof around with that some. One of the principles of self-defense is control the head, control the body. I can get a hold of your head, I can make your body do some amazing things. Okay, if I control your head, I can change your spinal alignment. I can control you. I can take all your power. I can take away your base. I can pin you to the ground. Control the head, control the body. That's essentially what this is. Change the way you think about what has happened to you. Change the way you think about how you respond to that, and what have you done to make. Now you've changed it. Romans 12:2. Do not conform to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, and then you prove what is good, acceptable, and perfect will of God. Changing the brain, changing the mind. Colossians chapter 3. Since then, you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on earthly things. You hear that mental shift? What are you thinking about? Where's your focus? You're going to have a change in the brain, not brain chemistry, but just a change in what you focus on. Am I looking at the problems I have in the world? Am I looking at the circumstances? Or am I looking at the things above? Now, how should you see yourself? For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. And when Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. Hey, wow, my definition of who I am is not based in trauma. My definition of who I am is not based in what happened to me or what didn't happen to me. My definition of who I am is not based on what you did or didn't do, but it's all based on what Christ did. Your life is now hidden in Christ. My life is not the sum total of my experiences. My life is not the total of my mistakes. My life is not the total of my inadequacies. My life is what Christ did for me, and my life is hidden in Christ. And when Christ, who is your life, appears, then you'll appear with him. Now, once you do that mental shift, once I see myself as a Christ-connected person, what happens? Put to death. Therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature, sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, greed, which is idolatry, because of these things the wrath of God is coming. You used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived, but now you must rid yourself of all such things as these: anger and rage and malice and slander and filthy language from your lips. Don't lie to each other, since you've taken off your old self with its practices and put on a new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge of the image of its creator. There's neither Greek nor Jew, nor circumcised nor uncircumcised, nor barbarian nor Scythian, nor slave nor free, but Christ is all and in all. So you change the way you think, you change the way you live. Your actions don't connect you to Christ, but your connection to Christ changes your actions. And we've gone the other way. We've said that if you make so many appearances at a building, you do all these projects, you're involved in all these programs, then you're in the club. You see what that does to a person who's struggling with addictions? Because I can't come as often as you come. I can't be as holy as you are. I can't be as righteous as you are because I've already done this. This has already been done to me. And it's about redefining how we interpret the events of our lives. And you notice these defense mechanisms of lying and manipulation and sexual practices and impurity. How do people who are empty respond to life? They look for the pleasure, they avoid the pain. And although this is not a one-to-one exchange for addictions, do you see how the principle works? You change the way you think, you change the way you live. And if you change the way you define life, then you change the rules and parameters. Therefore, as God's chosen people, now how does God view us? If I'm an addict, how does God view me? As God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved. Is there any addict that you know that believes God loves him dearly? What do we typically tell our addicts? You're a second-class citizen in the kingdom because you've done this. Anybody in here not guilty of something? That little girl right there. Okay, but give her time. Not an offense to the little girl. That's just the way. Okay, but we've taken, you've used a substance and therefore you're what? Different. As God's people, dearly loved. That's the fornicator, that's the liar, that's the drug abuser, that's the swindler. But we're living differently now. I see myself as connected to Christ. I see myself as raised with Christ. My heart's on things above. I set my mind on those things, not these things. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself in compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other. Forgive whatever grievances you have against one another. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues put on love, which binds them together in perfect unity. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you are called to peace, and be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, and teach and admonish one another with all wisdom, as you sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with gratitude in your hearts to the Lord. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it in the name of the Lord, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Now let's suppose that I were to take the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and read them. How many of those steps you think would fit into that context? You admit what we used to be, change who we are, connect to God, get rid of some of the resentments that we have, clean up the mistakes that we've made, make retribution when we can, and continue to teach other people how to live a better life. I'm not saying the 12 steps don't have a place. They're not going to cure addiction. Probably change the way you live. I think you probably take the 12 steps and look at the Beatitudes and find them there too. I'm not saying those guys weren't good at what they did. They just repackaged something that was already spiritually valid and they used it. It changes lives, doesn't always cure addiction. And I don't want you to think I'm hating on the 12 steps, but the problem with curing addiction is not a behavioral problem. It's a psychological problem. It's a coping problem. And you identify the coping mechanism and you change it, then you've reduced the root. You kill the stem, you kill the fruit. And that's all I got today. Any questions or comments or follow-ups or need clarification? Is this something you think you can use in understanding people that you run into who are dealing with these kind of things? As a general rule, if this is where I'm at and I use and I come down, then I have to use more to feel better. I come down. At some point you do this and you have to use to feel normal. that's where I'm running into a little bit of a roadblock. Is guys go, I hadn't been normal in so long, I don't know what normal feels like, and I don't like it. And so, in addition to the intervention stuff, I've been, and it'll be odd for me to talk about this because I'm not a math guy, but I talk to guys who are coming out of addictions, and I talk to them about the bell curve. And my understanding of the bell curve may be too elementary. Everybody familiar with the bell curve? It's not the symbol for Instagram, right? Okay, so if we're taking 100 students and we're giving them grades, where do 68 of those students fall? Right there. Those are your C+ students. Where do your B students land? Over here? Where do your A students land? Where are your A+ kids at? Yeah, okay. Now, where's your D students? Over here. And where's that nasty little letter that we all hate? All right, it's over here. People who are addicted and are using constantly are triggered constantly. And so when you're high, it feels like this. What happens when the A+ wears off? Well, who wants to live there? So it's easier just to stay in this state. Well, when they start living clean, normal lives, you have to say, you do realize that most of us live in the C+ world. Most of my days are C+. I get up, I eat breakfast, I go to work, I come home, I have supper, I watch mindless TV, and rinse and repeat, right? But if I do that Monday through Friday, occasionally they play SEC football. Occasionally you can climb a tree and shoot a deer with a bow and arrow. Occasionally you go climb a rock or ride a motorcycle or do whatever. And the addicted people are bouncing from having an A day to an F day. And would you trade that? So I have to tell folks, the majority of your days in life are going to fall into average. And learn to live average again. And a lot of these guys say, I have not had a party, had a celebration, gone on a trip, or gone even to a restaurant without having a high associated with it. I don't know what to do without my high. And so learning to re-educate expectation is another step I'm using. Because everybody doesn't have an A+ day. Now, when I say I'm having a C+ day, my life is wonderful. My biggest stress is it going to rain on a ropes course. That's my big stress in life. You know what happens if it rains on a ropes course? You get wet. It doesn't mess my hair up. So you know what? I mean, I really don't have a lot of stresses in life. I mean, honestly, I was with Ray Renfro one time hunting this farm with this old guy. We came out of the woods. Well, did you see anything, Brother Lonnie? I said, no, Ray, I didn't see anything this morning. He looked up at the beautiful fall sky. He said, if the only thing we got to complain about is we didn't see a deer, we're pretty blessed people. That's pretty true. But when we forget what normal, everyday life is, we ideal and unacceptable, and we forget that there's space between it. And so if it's not ideal, it's unacceptable, and I'm not going to do unacceptable. I'm going to stay in ideal, so I'm going to use. And so that's the one step I left out when I was kind of developing what I'm doing with addicts right now is educating them on, you put in a couple of C+ days to get your B and your A days, but everything's not an A day. And I hope that doesn't sound like a compromise. Yeah, there are those folks who, when they think about if it's not 100 miles an hour, it's just not any fun. Yeah, I see some of that. I see a lot of attention deficit stuff because I need to be stimulated. I need to be, where there's ways to get that same kind of thing without it having to be drug induced. But I do see, and I see a lot of interpretation errors. They try to be responsible for things they can't control. They do all or nothing thinking. There's a lot of, if you read David Burns's Feeling Good, the New Mood Therapy, and look at his cognitive distortions. And a lot of remember the interpretation error? Those interpretation errors fall right into those cognitive distortions. One of the cognitive distortions is entitlement, not like they're talking about in the media, but it's the unconscious belief that if I do what I'm supposed to do, you'll do what you're supposed to do. And if you don't do what you're supposed to do, somehow it's my fault. If I'm a good husband, she'll be a good wife. Well, she's not a good wife. I must fail as a husband. Really? This guy treated me bad. I must be a loser. How about this guy treated you bad because he's the loser? And so he talks about 7 cognitive distortions, and you talk about those defense mechanisms. Those defense mechanisms comes from that reaction of the cognitive distortions. Make sense? If you take this and we make a mobile out of it, okay, and we hang a bottle on Dad, and Dad's an addict, is that really the way this mobile hangs in an addicted family? Don't most addicted families look like this? And then when you take the bottle off Dad, what happens? It's out of bounds somewhere, because you'll either have a codependent wife who's responsible for his addiction, or she'll be co-addicted. You have one kid who's a superstar and one kid who's an abject failure. Look at the families you know with the addicts in them, and you got a guy, he's all A, all American, can't do anything wrong, super fast, super strong, super smart, and then you got this kid who can't walk and chew chewing gum at the same time. And he's either always in trouble with the law or he's always sick and in the hospital. Why? Well, if I could be smart enough, fast enough, strong enough, Dad wouldn't drink. If I can be sick enough, if I can be troubled enough, then Dad has to put the bottle down to deal with me. And we develop these coping mechanisms, and a lot of times it's not that Dad's on the bottle that makes us out of balance. The whole family's out of balance. Well, what happens when this guy's not drinking anymore, you've got these implanted beliefs, and that's why the next generation of addicts show up, because I'm responding to trauma that was interpreted from why Dad drank. My dad drinks and it's my fault. Really? Because if I can make you drink, I can make you sober. Right? And so the cognitive distortions and those personality types, I think it's a valid question. Anybody else? Right. Well, so now you're talking about, how and chronic pain. Wow. So and now I'm using opioids or using painkillers. Well, I was in pain and went to here, and if I'm not on this, I feel right in here, and they go, that's unacceptable. Well, that separation of ideal versus unacceptable. There's a point where you go, are you really living a healthy lifestyle by not being in any pain at all? But this is probably where real life is going to end up being, because you've had a severe accident or you've had a trauma or whatever. But again, they don't want to accept C- to B- days. They've got to be A, or I'm not going to play. If I don't feel like this, I'm going to feel like I did when I was in severe pain. Is that a rational truth? Then you're talking about, am I using the drug the way it's prescribed, or I'm abusing the drug? Because at some point, you do live with some pain. And the human body does not improve with age. But again, it goes back to, if I'm not feeling A+, it actually equals an F. Well, in truth, it's probably in here somewhere. And I don't know what levels of pain you're talking about, and pain's a relative term for people. Some people have a higher threshold, some people have a lower threshold. But at the point that my medicating the pain keeps me from working, keeps me from being functional with my family, keeps me from being able to be active in church and community, is your pain medicine doing what you think it's doing for you? Now it's a defense mechanism. You don't understand me. You don't know how bad it is. I know a lot of people who work every day with pain. And my chronic pain patients, I go, do you hurt more at home or hurt more at church? I hurt the same. Go to church. You hurt more at home or hurt more at work? I hurt the same. Go to work. My dad said, hey, son, when I come up this weekend, let's go hunt. Well, what about your back, Dad? What about your hip? Well, it's going to hurt if I hunt or not, so let's just hunt. Well, that's my dad. Okay, I mean, we're walking up on Kill Mountain, there's a huge rock. It's just a round rock. It's that thick, and it's laying just out in the middle of the woods. And I go, Dad, you ever thought about how that rock got there? He goes, what if it's just always been there? That's the way my dad sees the world. He's not worried about too much complicated. Hey, what if it's always been there? Well, you know what? It's probably always been there. And so Dad just kind of takes the world by the horns and goes with it. And he says, I hurt the same here as I do here. I might as well do stuff I enjoy. And I think a lot of times those defense mechanisms for, if I don't feel perfect, I can't work. If I don't feel perfect, I can't go to school. If I don't feel perfect, I can't interact with my family. That's a distortion from all or nothing thinking. Probably goes back to a fixed mindset, another trauma that says I've got to act this way or life's not right. And that's a distortion. And if we can ever find out where that kind of thinking came from, that personality type, you challenge the validity of that. Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's about the feeling I get when I'm not in pain. And again, that's why that powerful, powerful mechanism of I've associated this with this, and it's a psychological thing, not a physical thing, purely. Now, I've been in some chronic pain, and, I'd have been drinking hydrocodone smoothies if I could have had one before they did my back surgery. But at some point, I began to say, what if it doesn't get any better than this? What are you going to do? You can lay here on the couch, or you can learn to crawl. And I learned to crawl. And mine didn't last for years. Mine didn't even last for months. But you do have to make self-regulation, gratification, impulse control, and motivation. Will I do the hard work it takes necessary to get the reward that I want? And again, it goes back to that emotional mechanism being broken or off track. And that's where the addiction cycle comes in. It's not a medical problem. It's a psychological problem. Anybody else?
Take a half a dozen right now. As soon as I started taking those, man, did I feel good. Wow, man, I was just like, it was great. And I had to realize I still have one pill in that bottle. And I have to make sure that I don't take it. And I don't want to take it because it just put me at the far end of the spectrum. I didn't worry or care. Not that he cared. I mean, I just felt so good with it.
Yeah. And so I can feel this way all the time, or I can go live over here. Well, what would you do? Well, that's why, that's why guys use steroids. Hey, I'm in my mid 40s and I'm trying to lift weight, and these young guns in the gym are out lifting me, and I can juice up a little bit and I can outlift a 25-year-old. Well, you're not 25. Embrace it. But if you live in that false sense of expectation, then you never come out of it. And that's the power of addiction, is because it really does feel good when you're riding it.
Can you have more than one trauma?
Oh, man, yeah. Yeah, wow, yeah. You can have traumas that are related to the same theme. You can have different traumas. Yeah, it's amazing what the human being can endure and how we actually develop coping mechanisms. Oh yeah, sometimes you're trading one trauma for another. I've dealt with people who had so much trauma they would just be dissociative and actually have a place in their mind that the rest of their mind didn't know was there. And they camped out there to deal with it. It's a little scary when you see them. But our brains have the ability to protect us. Well, our brains learn path of least resistance. You know what? I can protect you from this. Let's have a beer. I can protect you from this. Let's have a drink. I can protect you from this. Let's have a pill. And so the brain learns pretty quick, hey, this works for me. And it repeats what works because we seek pleasure, we avoid pain. And that's what makes this thing so, so powerful and so controlling in people's lives. Anybody else? But there are people who take the pain medicines and they feel good and they have energy and they can function. Yeah, you know, I'm going to go outside and paint the house. I'm going to do some jumping jacks, you know. I'm afraid that if they gave me something that I could go out here and run 5 miles, it'd be hard for me not to take it. Because I know what it felt like to run 5 miles 5 years ago and what it feels like now. You know, now I do my 5 miles in my truck. You know, but yeah. And so, you know, yeah. And some people go, hey, I want to be zombied out. Well, they're masking pain. Well, some people want to amplify the taste of food and the sound of music. And now they enjoy life. Okay? And so, yeah, that's hard to turn out. Thank you guys for coming. I hope it was beneficial. Thank you very much. So anybody else? Well, thank you guys for coming. I hope the information is good. Lance Dode's work, and then, you know, there's lots of things out there about the addiction cycle, but I really believe what Dr. Dode's is doing is going to change the face of some of how we treat addictions. And thank you guys for spending a part of a Saturday with me. Hope you have a good rest of the day. Hope your team wins unless they play my team. All right.